Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and this is our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. I am here with this week's guest. Her name is Friederike Fabritius. She is the author of the new book, I Have a Prop. It's The Brain-Friendly Workplace. We are going to talk about how you can create a brain-friendly workplace, and we're going to talk about how to retain talent. Her subtitle is Why Talented People Quit and How to Get Them to Stay, which is a pressing problem for almost everyone these days. Friederike, so nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I said before I'm having a bit of a fangirl moment here, so I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. I love having you. And welcome to everyone tuning in from around the world. Please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are watching from. I'm in Miami. Friederike's in Germany. Where are you? All right, Friederike. So the first thing in reading your book, which was really interesting, you were talking about so the brain-friendly workplace, I think, is a really interesting frame for all of this, because you were talking about a term that you call neurosignatures, which is very, very interesting. It's not necessarily how the untrained would think about it. And I was fascinated by the concept. Can you explain what a neurosignature is and how that contributes to a brain-friendly workplace?
Yes, and your signature is your unique lens through which you see the world. So it shapes how you think, how you feel, how you act. So it's a bit the blueprint of your personality, as unique as your fingerprint. And it's determined by four neurochemicals that shape your brain. It's both in it's not just nature, it's also nurture. So I would say it's 50-50 on those two things. And there's dopamine, serotonin, estrogen, and testosterone that really create a unique combination in your brain. And so everyone is different. And I'm talking about neurosignatures in the book because I feel like the workplace needs to acknowledge that every brain is different and people need different ways of working to be productive and happy.
Amen to that. That sounds good. Certainly we are experiencing a cultural moment here where a lot of people have been reevaluating their priorities. I mean, at the beginning of your book, you cite all the statistics, which by now most of us are familiar with, at least in an anecdotal sense, of people wanting to make changes in their jobs, in their lives, in their professions. There was just an interesting article in the Atlantic yesterday about how high income men, for the first time in 30 years, are actually using some of their money and resources to buy back their time and dial back the amount that they're spending in the office, which seems to be perhaps a lasting shift coming out of the pandemic. So as a result of this, I'm curious, how does all this factor into talent retention? When we think about creating a brain-friendly workplace, what can a manager do to optimize for this and make a workplace that would be better for their employees?
I think the reason why people are quitting is because the workplace is not adapted for their brains and it makes people miserable. It makes people unproductive. We're wasting so many hours. So many people are bored or stressed. And what I found in the book is something that I call the neuro gap. So only a certain type of people, of neurosignatures, are thriving in the workplace. The ones who are highly stress resistant, ambitious, hard boiling, tough minded, and all the other ones drop out. So, in order to retain people, we need to make the workplace more attractive and more in line how different brains act. So, for example, one thing people should do is to understand that people have different optimal stress points. And so, for example, you may have a different optimal stress point from me. So, you may reach your best performance maybe at higher or lower stress levels than me. And what this means is that we need a respect for people with different stress tolerance in the workplace. Right now, we have that feeling that whoever is most resistant to stress and most hardworking is the best performer, when in reality, we alienate a lot of deep thinkers because we have that narrow-minded view. So I think workplaces should offer different ways of working. So some people should be able to work at lower stress levels so that they can access their best brain performance. Other things managers can do is really optimize for neural balance. So we know that the body and the brain are connected. So when you optimize for neural balance, you make sure that people can move throughout the day, they see sunlight, they get time to sleep, all of those things that should be so basic. But when you look at how people actually are working at top levels, it's not happening. It's extremely unhealthy, not just for your body, but also your brain.
That's really interesting. Thank you. We're here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. I'm Dorie Clark, and this is our guest, Friederike Fabritius. You can learn more about her at her website right here. And the new book that she just released is The Brain Friendly Workplace. If you're enjoying the conversation, hit the like and share button so that your friends and colleagues on your social channel of choice can learn more about our discussion. And we want to say hi to some of the great friends tuning in from all over the world. Peter's back from Edinburgh. Benedicta is from Nashville, Indiana, which it sounds like two different places, but apparently it's one place. So we're learning things every day. That's amazing. Evan's here. Carolyn's tuning in from North Carolina. Damaris is also in Miami. Beth's in London. And we have Fatumata, who's in the UK, and Adrian in Bristol, Tennessee. We love having every single one of you. And type your questions for Friederike into the chat box. Now, Friederike, something that I'm wondering about, one of the concepts you talk about in your book is leveraging, I guess we can call them the 3 Fs. You talk about fear, fun, and focus. How do these factors tie in together? What's the relationship between them, and how can we leverage them better?
Fun, fear, and focus is the magical cocktail your brain needs to get into flow. And we know that when people get into the flow state, they're up to 5 times more productive. So you could just work 1 day a week and be more productive than others who work for 5 days. And this is related to neurochemistry. So when we're having fun at work, the brain releases dopamine, and that gives you a real boost. So it is important to enjoy what you're doing in order to get the best brain performance. Then the fear factor is correlated to the fact that when we're just slightly over challenged, so when the challenge is a little bit too big for you, that's when the brain releases norepinephrine. And that's what we also need. It's a bit like that kick when you get when you take an ice bath or a cold shower. It gives you that energy boost. We need that. We can't be bored. We can't be stressed. We need to get it just right. And then focus, finally. We know that when people multitask, they make 50% more mistakes and they take 50% longer to complete the task. And that is insane. We need to train our brains again to stay focused on one thing at a time. And then the brain releases acetylcholine, which is the third magical ingredient in our cocktail. So you need fun, fear, and focus. And when you optimize all 3 of them, you get into flow whenever you need it, whenever you want it.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're here with our guest, Friederike Fabritius. Her new book is The Brain Friendly Workplace. Type your questions about how to create your own brain friendly workplace or how to retain talent better in today's environment into the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. We want to say hi to Kathy, who's tuning in from St. Louis. Cheryl's in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Colleen's in New Jersey. Harsha's in London. Thanks for connecting us, Harsha. William is in Atlanta. Shariva is in Memphis. Amanda's here. We have Alicia's back from Berkeley, and my man Japar is in Zurich. We love having all of you here. Now, Friederike, something that I was wondering about in your book, one of the ways that you arrange this is you have a lot of interviews with a diverse array of leaders, and you're sharing their insights in the book. Can you talk a little bit about your interview process? How you identified the folks that you spoke to, and what for you was the most interesting discovery as you were talking to all of these folks and constructing your book?
Well, I wanted to bring in the neuroscience and then application. So I wanted to make sure I talk to leaders in their fields who are really trying those things out in the workplace. So I have people like Ariana Huffington. I have John Medina from Brain Rules. So I have some managers who do interesting breathing techniques to calm their brains. I loved, I have, it was really a lot of interesting people. And so I don't want to pick one of them, but there was one interview that I found so refreshing because I had talked to Stephen Oscar. Oh my God, I'm getting his name wrong. Let me pick up Stephen Arstool, it is. And he is the CEO of Tower Paddleboards and Electric Bikes. And he had introduced the 5-hour work day. And I thought that was so fascinating. I had read his book, so I reached out to him and I said, hey, tell me more about this 5-hour workday. What's happening in your company? He had boosted profits. And then when I talked to him, he said, well, we actually stopped that because people became entitled. And I found that so refreshing because he really then gave me the details on how they're doing things differently. So he's really like looking at the process, making things better for people. So now, for example, they have the 5 hour workday just during the summers, and people kind of have to work to get it so that they are not just like dropping everything at 1 p.m. and just say, hey, it's 1 p.m. and 1 second. I'm not doing any work anymore. And so I love that I would say that honesty in that interview. It made me laugh out loud several times. Yeah, that's just one example, but each and one of them was fascinating because they all were so honest. And I love when people really share personal secrets to well-being and when it's not just reading a marketing brochure. If you had of talent at BCG, of course, you could just talk about how you're perfect and do everything perfect. And I love that people were real in those interviews.
Yeah, that's so great. It's always fascinating when people talk about experiments that they're trying or experiments that haven't worked. I can certainly imagine that if you have an entire office or manufacturing floor full of folks who are like high schoolers who get up when the bell rings, that would probably not work too well. So really interesting to think about how to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm Dorie Clark. This is Newsweek's weekly interview show Better, and Friederike Fabritius is our guest. She is the author of The Brain Friendly Workplace, and we have wonderful questions coming in from all over the world. Friederike, a question came in from Colleen, and she wants to know your perspective. Do you find that different generations have different brain performance needs? We hear a lot about the wild differences in generations. Do you think this is accurate, or is it all individual? What's your take?
Well, what I think is the brain hasn't changed much for the past 100,000 years. So, in a sense, evolution doesn't happen so quickly. But I think what has changed is the culture. So, people are now more open to sharing what they truly want and need without being so scared of the consequences. So, I think what we see is, for example, more men desiring to spend time with their family. I think it has always been that way. It's just more acceptable now to talk about it. So I think when we see differences, it's more about what's socially accepted rather than that suddenly the brain changed. Of course, I understand there are epigenetic changes and change can happen. I'm not saying we're like put into stone, your brain can never change. The brain is extremely plastic, but certain ways of operating and certain behaviors are pretty consistent over the years. So I think we see a tremendous change because we have more focus on mental health now. So it's more acceptable to show certain behaviors. And I would like to add one point when it comes to more flexible working. And as you said, with this, the new study you just found where high income men decide to downgrade and get their time back. When you look back in history, and not just for 200 years, but actually for thousands of years, you'll see that the hunter-gatherers, they work just 15 hours a week, and they spend lots of time with their loved ones. Both men and women, we tend to not think about that. So our brains have not changed. What has changed is the social norms.
Excellent. Really helpful. We're here with Friederike Fabritius. Her book is The Brain Friendly Workplace. We want to say hi to Sandy, who's tuning in from Ireland. Amanda's in Rio de Janeiro. Katie's in New Jersey. Melissa's in Canada. Jose is in Salvador, Brazil. We have Amanda here. Wow. Brazil is in the house. We have Estras, who's in Rio also. Haley's in Dallas. Pani is in London. Marco's in Milan. We've got Paulina in Cleveland. Dominique in New Jersey. Jen in Wisconsin. And Olga tuning in, your countrymen from Berlin. We love having every single one of you. And a great question came in, Friederike, from our mutual friend, Harsha, podcaster extraordinaire. He wants to know, could you expand on the importance of agency and control in the workplace? What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's so incredibly important. So there was one study where they had a group of mice and two groups of mice, and the one group received electroshocks and they could turn it off with a lever, and the other one received electroshocks whenever the mice in group A pressed the lever. So they had no control, no autonomy, no way of determining things. So the mice who could turn off the electroshocks did just well. They were just, I mean, not just fine. It's not good to receive electroshocks. It's stressful, but did okay. While the ones who had no control died and were really miserable. And the same is true for people. Our brains thrive on autonomy. We love when we can shape our own destiny. So I always say the number one protection against stress is getting into the driver's seat again, not feeling like a victim. You may be a victim, but there's always something you can do. You can change your attitude, you can make small changes, big changes. Always ask yourself, what is one thing I can do that will improve that situation? And that dramatically reduces cortisol levels in your brain. Harsha, so great to see you here. It's lovely to know you're watching.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much. We want to say hi to our amazing friends. Francis is tuning in from Columbia. Lynn is in Washington State. Kristen's in Northern Indiana. David's joining us. We have Diana from South Carolina. We have Bree from Knoxville. Stephanie in Southern California, and Anna from Palm Springs. Welcome to all of you. Please hit the like and share button if you'd like your friends and colleagues to benefit from our conversation with author Friederike Fabritius. She wrote The Brain Friendly Workplace. And a question has come in, Friederike, from Haley, and she wants to know, how can I help tenured managers overcome their fear of learning something new? She says, I often hear this is working for me. So why should I change what I'm doing? If you are managing someone who's a little bit reluctant to take the plunge on learning something new or trying something different, what should we do?
That's a tricky one because, of course, the older you get, the more a part of your brain that's called the basal ganglia collects information and collects patterns. And of course, you gain experience and wisdom, and you may be successful with that. So, why change something? I would say try something new because it keeps your brain young. We know that when people experiment and make new experiences, it actually sparks dopamine, acetylcholine. We have all those positive hormones. So I would say do it for the fun of it. Try it because it keeps you alive. Instead of forcing people, I would make it more like a game or something that rejuvenates you. I mean, everybody's talking about longevity these days. I would be motivated by trying something new if I know it's good for my hormones, it's good for my stress levels. Yeah, something. And I've also heard very good experiences about reverse mentoring, where you're not mentoring just a younger person, but you get mentorship from somebody younger than yourself. I think that can also be a very interesting setup because then you get the oxytocin, which is activating the social networks in the brain. So maybe doing this in a positive group setting could also help.
Excellent tips. We're here with Friederike Fabritius, the author of The Brain Friendly Workplace. This is Dorie Clark with Better, our weekly Newsweek interview show. If you want to make sure that you are plugged in, that you never miss an episode, go to dorieclark.com. You can sign up, download a free self-assessment, and you'll get reminders about wonderful opportunities like this to connect with great authors, thinkers, and executives. We want to say hi to Radu, who's joining us from Doha, Qatar. We have Mubina in the house. Zili is here. Sandra. We have Tarif. We have Zeke, who is from deep South Texas. I love the evocative turn of phrase, Zeke. San Benito, right? We have Amanda Sushma's in India. Todd's in New York City. We love having all of you here. And a question, Friederike, came in from Shadi, and she wants to know, if you are performing different tasks, should we be kind of toggling the difficulty level? Should we be slightly over challenged? I mean, this is how it works with muscle building, right? You want to slightly over challenge the muscles. Should we be doing this with our knowledge work as well? What do you think?
Yes, we absolutely should. It's important to understand, though, that the goal is not to be in flow 24/7. That's a very exhaustive, intensive brain state. So if you're slightly over challenged all day long, by the end of the day, you're just brain dead. So that's not workable. We also need some cycling between rest and challenge, rest and challenge. So my recommendation would be to have a certain amount of hours where you just can relax, you know what you're doing. You keep things consistent. You don't have to challenge yourself all day long. But in those areas where you want to get into flow, so your most important task, an important presentation, a new project that matters to you, that's where you should challenge yourself, and that's where you should move the bar. And you should improve two things: your challenge and your skill level. Both of them need to be pushed, but don't do it all day long. I think that's exactly exactly what happens with people who sign up for new habits for the new year in these things. They over challenge themselves and they get to the point where everything is just exhausting and you go back to eating chocolate cake or something very quickly. So do it when it matters.
That's right. Do it when it matters so we are not constantly eating chocolate cake. This is important advice. You can get more important advice at Friederike's website, friederikefabritius.com. Her new book is The Brain Friendly Workplace. We want to say hi to our amazing friends tuning in from around the world. Masood's in Karachi. We have Franz in Bonaire. We have Ravi from Delhi. David's in Boston. We have Judith from Malta. We're glad to have all of you. And Alicia from the West Coast, from Berkeley, wants to know, can you speak to neuroprivilege and its relationship to the ability to access focus? So neuroprivilege is a really interesting concept. Do you have thoughts or a take on that, Friederike?
I've never heard of neuroprivilege. That is, so it's hard for, I hope I'm answering your question right, Alicia. And if I get it wrong, then you need to send me a LinkedIn message and explain to me what neuroprivilege is. So,
I know,
I don't
now
want to
we all
miss
want to
out. And it
know.
sounds
Tell us.
cool. It sounds cool. So, neuroprivilege sounds to me like maybe if you have a very privileged brain and you eat right and you sleep well. I have no idea what neuroprivilege is. So maybe I should learn about that first before answering that question.
That sounds good. All right, we're all going to get informed together. That sounds like an excellent plan. So another question came in also, Friederike, from Judith, and she wants to know how. So if we're, let's say we're a manager, let's say we're trying to build a brain-friendly workplace, how do you actually measure to prove the changes that you made in the workplace? Do you have any recommendations for measurement? We may be trying very, very earnestly, but how do we know that we're succeeding?
I once did a project where I even measured people's brain activity, and I looked at how stressed they were and whether they were able to get into flow and whether they were able to relax quickly, because it's also very important that you can go back into relaxation after a stressful moment. But that's a bit complicated. I mean, there were wearable devices, but I wouldn't recommend that you walk around measuring people's brain activity all day long. Then there's surveys. Surveys are very inefficient. A lot of research shows that you send people a survey and they just put what they think you want to hear. So it's not a very good way, not a very efficient way to measure. I would rather look at hard numbers. So, for example, if you want to create a brain friendly workplace, what do we want to achieve? How many people go into burnout? How many sick days? How many female leaders do you have? How diverse is your company? How is the performance? Are you losing or are you growing as a company? I think hard numbers, hard KPIs, the ones that we already are tracking, are a good way to start. And then I would probably pilot this in a part of the organization and then just measure, compare it to a similar part of the organization that doesn't do these changes. And then you can compare these very hard KPIs.
That's great. And for KPI, for folks who are not familiar with it, it's key performance indicators. I didn't used to know that either. So just in case. So, all right, question for you, Friederike. An interesting question came in from Tarif. He wants to know, what should the normal working hours be? If we're trying to have a brain-friendly workplace, presumably our brains are not working, perfectly for the 16 hours a day that we're not sleeping. We might need to rest. We maybe, working so much is not the right move. Do you have advice? I mean, we heard earlier from you that the gentleman who had implemented the 5-hour workplace, that created some problems around entitlement. So what should we be striving for?
Well, there was an interesting study that looked at people, and they found that in an 8-hour workday, they were only really productive for 3 hours, roughly. So the rest of the time was spent on social media, boring meetings, preparing snacks. There was like a long list of things people were doing instead while working. So what I suggest is we really take those 3 hours as an optimum. If you also look at our ancestors, hunter-gatherers were about 99.9% of our shared history. And if we look at how they also worked roughly 15 hours a week. So I think that's probably an optimum. If you do more, you're not necessarily getting more out of it. There's a bit of that curve that, how with 20% of your efforts, you gain 80% of the results. So it's about working smarter, not harder. I mean, if you want to work more, go for it. Absolutely. But I think we can all be more efficient, get rid of stupid meetings that nobody needs. We can all cut down on inefficiencies. And that's, for example, something Stephen Arstool really did. He cut down on really useless activities that people were doing, but that didn't really return on investment.
Really interesting point. We're here with Friederike Fabritius. Her website is right here, and her book is The Brain Friendly Workplace. This is Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. And a question came in. This is an important one, Friederike, from Sandra, or maybe Sandra. So hello. It is basically, it's a tall one, so I'm gonna stand up high here. She basically says, "Hey, we're wired to like people who are like us. This can create obvious problems in terms of hiring because we will just keep replicating us. So if we actually want to build a diverse workplace, and this is something that you talk about, is hiring issues in a brain-friendly workplace, how can we avoid just hiring ourselves or mirror images of ourselves, and how can we become more cognizant of our biases in the process?"
I think the first step is to understand that diversity is a good thing. And so, for example, they did studies on people who were dissenters. This came from the University of Berkeley. And normally we find it very annoying if somebody dissents and disagrees with us. It immediately sends an error signal in our brains and we feel uncomfortable. But in reality, it helps everyone to think better. So it lifts everyone up. So if you think of it not as something annoying that makes your life worse, but try to hire people, for example, that love the task that you hate. I mean, that makes your life better. If I hire somebody who takes care of all the stuff I dislike, I need to hire somebody very different from myself, but it makes a huge positive impact on my life. I think you just need to, first of all, understand that it's a good thing. Second, try to find the personal benefit in it. If it improves your thinking, if the person does things that you don't like to do, or maybe works with clients that you don't have a natural affinity to. So, I think it's good to understand the value that brings to the workplace would be the first step. And there are so many studies that show that the moment people get into a room together, they all start to get into group think very easily and just follow the majority opinion. So even if you hire different people, it's important to have good processes in place that control for that. So for example, anonymous voting, vote anonymously so that people don't try to please the boss. If you do a brainstorming session, brainstorm first alone and then share with the group. Otherwise, people are just going to appease the boss and agree with whatever the most senior person in the room has said. So even when you have hired different people, then you still need to control for our deep wired desire to conform. Conformity it is.
Indeed, conformity it is. This is really useful. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take the liberty as the host of tackling the last one. Shariva says, "What would be a good way to introduce this concept to your business management team or supervisor?" Well, Shariva, your cousin Shariva, Friederike, that is a good layup here. I think everyone should get her book. I think Friederike's book is great. It's The Brain Friendly Workplace. You can learn more about Friederike's work. Just go to her website right here, friederikefabritius.com. Friederike, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks so much for having me. You're such a great host. So it was so much fun.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next Thursday. It's noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Is it 6 p.m. for you in Germany? Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right. See you all then. And thank you very much. Take care.